Thank you for coming. I'm John Mullane. I'm a counselor at Gateway Community College. I wanted to do this presentation on community college transfer student success at the Connecticut State Universities and UConn. And I've done sort of two studies on community college transfer students last year. One was students who transfer to the state universities. The other one was students who transfer to UConn. So I'll talk a little bit about those studies and some of the data, but one of the things I want to talk about today is the success of students who start at community colleges, transfer to our state universities, how well they do. I also want to talk about some of the barriers to their success, which one of the largest barriers is losing credits when they transfer, and then look at some of the transfer activity, because there is a lot of transfer activity throughout our system, throughout the Connecticut State University system. So it's important to sort of see the paths that students take as they pursue a bachelor's degree, because they do take a lot of paths and do a lot of transferring. But before I start, let me just go around and just your name, where you're from, where you teach. And
Sue Spencer, I teach math at Gateway. Pat Bouffard, Dean of Academic and Student Affairs at Northwestern.
Northwestern.
Laura McCarthy, Director of the Academic Success Center at Northwestern.
Okay. And you student here?
I'm Lisa McCree, I'm a student at UConn.
Okay, great. Okay, so these were the two studies that I did last year. So some data on community college success that I think is important to look at. About 41% of undergraduates begin their studies at a community college. So, when we talk about sort of the traditional college student, a lot of times we think about someone who's 18 years old, graduates, goes to a 4-year residential college. But that's not your typical college student. Your typical college student is more likely to be a community college student. So 41% of students start at a community college, and about 46% of all undergraduates in this country attend a community college. So we have more students in community college than any other sector of higher education, which is important. And many of our students work full-time, part-time. I think one of the statistics was over 70% of community college students work. Majority of them may work full-time while going to school. A lot of students go full-time, work full-time and go to school full-time, which has a lot of challenges, but it also shows sort of the dedication of community college students. Because one of the reasons I wanted to do some of the studies I do is just to show their success. Because there are some myths or perceptions about community colleges, and that somehow the education at a community college just isn't comparable or as rigorous as what you would get at a 4-year school. So I wanted to do some of the studies and really look at the data to show that students do well who attend community colleges. So attending a community college and then transferring can be a really good path for students. So looking at some of this, this statistic is really an important statistic from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center. 46% of all students who completed a degree at a 4-year institution had previously attended a community college. So that's important. If you look at across the country each year, all the students that graduate with a bachelor's degree, nearly half of them have attended a community college at some point in their lives. And if you look at the data from the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, it's not a situation where they're coming in for maybe one class and then leaving. Some do. But if you look at this, the majority of students, about half of those students, spent at least 2 years at a community college before transferring to get their bachelor's degree. And about 65% of those students spent at least 3 semesters at a community college before getting their bachelor's degree. So it shows that community colleges play an important role in helping students to receive bachelor's degrees, and it shows that they do spend a significant amount of time at our schools before transferring and completing a bachelor's degree. So this shows across the country, each state, the percentage of students that graduate that have previously attended a community college. Now you can see Connecticut, it's about 31%, which is lower than a lot of the states, but Connecticut also has a high proportion of private 4-year schools. So, but this data really shows you that community colleges, and in some of the states, Texas, it's about 70%, California, 62%, they have really high percentages of students who come in, go through the community college system, or may start at a 4-year school, transfer into the community college system, before completing their bachelor's degree. And it's one of those things that, as I started to do this research, I knew that our students did well. I just didn't know, by looking at all this data, how well. And I think, as a system, this is something that we need to publicize more, the success of our system and of our students. So community college success, the Student Clearinghouse Research Center, they do a lot of really good research on transfer students and graduation rates. So they found about 65% of transfer students who start or were at community colleges and transfer to four-year public institutions, about 65% of them will graduate with bachelor's degrees. And then students who get an associate's before transferring, they have a graduation rate of about 73%. So, we do know, ideally, in the ideal situation, we would want the student to come in, get their bachelor's degree before transferring. A lot of them transfer before, but statistically, students who do get their degree first do graduate at a higher rate. So if we have an optimal system in place where they can get their degree and transfer, that's, of course, the best scenario for the students. And then 84% of full-time students will graduate with bachelor's degrees. So if a student can transfer and go exclusively full-time at a four-year school, it's about an 84% graduation rate. And the interesting thing is, if you look, mixed enrollment, switching full-time, part-time, it's about 62%, and a student who goes exclusively part-time is 25%. So, while ideally we all know the really great stories of a student who 5-10 years in education and persevered and was able to get their degree, and that's a great story, but that is rare. It's very rare. We want them to get through as quickly as possible, graduate as quickly as possible, and mixed, it just shows that if you're just part-time and sort of going longer and longer, it's harder. It's that much harder. As we've learned today with all the seminars, a lot of things just start to get in the way the longer they're churning through higher education. So the first study I did was community college students at the state universities, Central, Southern, Eastern, and Western, so our 4 state universities. And I had concluded in that Connecticut community college transfer students actually graduate at higher rates and are more likely to receive bachelor's degrees than the native students who start at the four-year institutions. So, it shows you that the students who attend a community college and then successfully transfer, that those students do very well. And an amazing statistic from the Board of Regents is in 2014, about 62% of all the students that graduated with a bachelor's degree from the 4 CSUs had previously attended a Connecticut community college. So it really shows you that in our system how well we do as a community college system to prepare students for bachelor's degrees. And I want to show you here it is. So this is from the Board of Regents. This is where the CSU, where the graduates came from. So this, if you're looking, this tells you, these are all our 12 community colleges, and then these are where the students earn their bachelor's degrees. So you have, for last year, or 2014, Central, Southern, Eastern, or Western, and you can see from the community colleges how many students received bachelor's degrees that had previously been at your school. So it gives you an idea, to see how well students do and how many actually graduate when they transfer. Now the interesting thing and we'll look at sort of transfer activity in some later slides as well, but when you look at where the degrees come from, a lot of times it can be somewhat geographic. If we look at our students, where they go, they may have certain goals of where they want to go, but in the end, most likely where they're going to go, it has a lot to do more with geography than anything else. They're going to most likely go to the closest four-year school. It's the last community college they attended. They're more likely to go to the community college that's the closest to where they either live or work. There isn't, much secret to that. So if you look at some of the schools like Gateway, we have Southern and New Haven, so we send a lot of students to Southern. And a lot of students do, graduate from Southern. And then Housatonic as well. It's the closest, sends the most to Southern. If you look at some of the, Manchester, where they're located, you have Central and Eastern closest to them, so they have the most graduates there. And then the schools that are furthest away don't have as many graduates, because they most likely don't send as many students there. But it's really amazing to see how well students do. So for the individual schools to really see how well your students do when they transfer, to show the success. Because I think one of the key things we need to do in our system more is really promote success and the success of students when they transfer. So for some of the data from the state universities, from Southern Connecticut, about 40% of Southern's undergraduate enrollment, their entire undergraduate enrollment, is transfer students. And about 67% of the transfer students are from the Connecticut Community College system. Gateway is their largest feeder school with about 23.5 transfer students. Housatonic is the second largest. And their Student Success Task Force, this came out about two years ago. They did some really good research about transfer students. And they found that the data show transfer students are more likely to graduate than native Southern students. And within those who transfer, those who graduate are more likely to transfer an average of about 45 credits. And then some of the other interesting facts, transfer students actually had a lower high school class rank and lower SAT scores, but overall, after 6 semesters at Southern, they had a higher GPA than the students who started there, which is really, when you look at the data and think about it, it's really significant because most of those students probably went to the same high schools. They probably went to the same high schools in greater New Haven area, because it's very regional. I mean, our community colleges are regional, the state universities, most of the students, it's very regional. So when we look at that, you see a student who wasn't doing as well in high school, went to the community college, and then when they transferred over, they did well. So it really shows, and this was from my first study, and we actually put this, I think this was in our NEASC report, but it's important to show the success. And they said for students who transferred in 45 or more credits, they found that the Connecticut Community College students did just as well academically in terms of GPA and graduation rates as students who transferred from UConn, another state university, or a private four-year school. So they did just as well as any other students, the ones who came over with about 45 credits. Now the concern part is they did find that the students with the lowest GPA and most at risk were community college students who had less than 45 credits. Usually, sometimes the institution of research, what they do is they find a number of credits and they sort of have that as the cutoff. Western did it for 30 students with 30 credits. Southern did 45 to really see the differences. But they found that the students with the lowest GPA and most at risk were the community college students with less than 45. So what that can tell us is, the more classes they take at a community college, the more time they're with us, the more prepared they can be when they transfer. But it can also say that if they transfer too early, that can put them at risk for not being able to complete their bachelor's degree. And then for Western, Western did a comparison of students who came in with 30 credits. So they looked at their native students who complete the first year in good standing with 30 credits. They have a graduation rate of about 60%. So if you complete the first year at Western with 30 credits, about 60% of them will graduate. For the students who transferred into Western after completing a year, 30 credits, their graduation rate was higher at 70%. And then they did an analysis of 5 years of fall cohorts and found that the transfer students, not only did they graduate at a higher rate from the community college system, but they actually graduated at a higher rate than all the other transfer students as well. So they had the highest graduation rates of their students. And then Eastern. Eastern's graduation rate, this is from 2 years ago, was about 50.2%. The transfer students was 61%. And the community college students at Eastern, their graduation rate was about 66%. So they have a really good graduation rate at Eastern. I think that Eastern had probably the highest graduation rate for Connecticut community college students. And then UConn, for students who transfer to UConn, Connecticut community college students who transfer with about 60 or more credits have a graduation rate of about 82%. So if they can bring in 60 or more credits, obtain junior level standing, they have a graduation rate of about 82%. Students who participate in the GAP program, the Guaranteed Admission Program, are you all familiar with that program? So students who select the GAP program and actually enroll at UConn through the GAP program, they have a graduation rate of about 88%. So they do really well. So by looking at this data, it shows that the more credits a student is able to transfer over, the better they do. And it shows that the education at a community college can really prepare students, whether it's a state university or UConn, that students do well. Now, the largest barrier to the student completing a bachelor's degree is losing credits when they transfer. And that's the second study I did on students at UConn. We actually found that students who transfer to UConn lose about 20% of their credits when they transfer. And this data was taken from about 2 years ago. The Program Review and Investigations Committee at the state legislature did a study on UConn's affordability. And what they asked them in the study, which was a great question, was they wanted to know how many credits they were accepting and rejecting from students from the Connecticut community college system. Because when you talk about college access, affordability, and student success, a lot of the talk is always about student loans, financial aid, scholarships, helping students to refinance, but there isn't a lot of talk about transfer credits. And so they asked a really good question, which is, how many credits are you accepting and how many are you rejecting from students that transfer over? And they had said, well, we don't really track that. So they said, okay, well, we want you to take a year and track it, and we want you to give us a report. So they had to do a report of how many credits they were accepting or rejecting, and it came to about 20%. Students were losing about 20% of their credits when they transferred. It came out to about a semester. The average community college student that transferred over was losing about 12 credits. So it was delaying their graduation by about a semester. And the interesting thing was, when I looked at data from the National Center for Education Statistics, that's about the national average. They did a national study, and the students in their study lost 20% of their credits. Now, in the national study, the students at UConn, they had about 54 credits going over that were C or better, that were eligible to transfer, and about 42 applied to their major or gen ed. In the national study from the National Center for Education Statistics, students only had about 38 credits and 30 transferred. So it was a 20% loss. But it shows you nationally that students, aren't overall, an associate's degree is 60 credits. But, and as we'll look at some of the transfer data as well, but students are transferring early and not bringing over the full amount of credits that they can to a four-year school. So for UConn, the average loss was about 12 credits. It came for students who transferred over last year, that came to about a loss of $3 million because it was about 479 community college students, and it was going to be an extra semester, so tuition and fees was about $6,300. So if you put that together, it came to about $3 million in tuition and fees that they were going to have to pay because now they weren't going to be graduating on time. So it really puts a cost with losing credits, and I think that's important to be able to look at the loss, because this is credits. We always talk about savings when you attend a community college. You can save money by attending and transferring, but this is a loss. I mean, these are credits. If you look at that in the National Center for Education Statistics study, those were credits earned at a community college that weren't applying when they transferred. So now it's more time, it's more money to complete a bachelor's degree. And they're going from public institutions. So not only are the students paying twice when they lose credits, but the taxpayers are paying twice. Most likely, if they're using up federal financial aid, the federal government's paying twice. So it's a huge cost. So it's something that if you can streamline the process and have a system in place that really works and works well, it can save the students money, it saves the state money, and it makes higher education affordable and accessible for all students, because now you can graduate much more students in a much quicker way. So I want to show you just two clips. One is a week after the study went out. When I had first published the study, it was actually picked up by the Associated Press that day, and it ran everywhere, because when the Associated Press gets it, it just goes everywhere. But it was in the Hartford Courant, all the Connecticut papers, the Connecticut Post, you know, all pretty much the Associated Press runs everywhere. So it got a lot of publicity. And about a week later, Senator Chris Murphy actually proposed federal legislation to try and address this issue. And it was the first time in a while that someone has really put the college affordability legislation together with transfer credits. Because even a lot of the legislation this year deals with financial aid, it deals with refinancing, trying to get states to spend more money on education, trying to get the federal government to increase Pell Grants, and trying to get schools to lower tuition. Now, all of that would be great, but it's not really reality. It's not happening. Tuition's going up, states are spending less, the federal government's spending less, and the Pell Grant did go up a little, but an extra few $100s on a Pell Grant doesn't really help a student, especially if you're a low-income student that now has to spend an extra $5,000, $6,000 in an extra semester retaking classes. So it was really good that he did that legislation, was able to sort of tie it together. So I just want to show you the two clips.
When students who transfer from community college, it's partly because UConn's professors who transfer from community college. It's partly because UConn's professors can say whether a certain credit is acceptable. A study out of Gateway Community College estimates that UConn transfer students are spending an extra $3 million per semester because they have to retake classes that look similar to one already taken at community college. Gateway counselor John Mullane says that this is particularly harmful to low-income students who are already struggling to pay for a bachelor's degree. They're using up financial aid dollars to do this, and it can be a huge cost, and it can drive a lot of them to end up dropping out because they don't have the money to continue. It's a problem across the country, according to David Jenkins, a researcher at Columbia Teachers College.
The biggest barrier to community college students who are seeking to transfer and get a bachelor's degree is the inefficiency of the credit transfer process.
Jenkins says that the decisions professors make to determine whether a credit should transfer is often arbitrary.
In Connecticut and other states, there's statewide agreements about what can transfer and what not. The problem is oftentimes a university department will overrule that.
UConn Vice Provost Sally Reese says sometimes community college courses aren't rigorous enough.
If they don't have the same level of textbooks, the same level of challenge, if they don't cover enough courses, the content actually just isn't there. The students moving on would not be able to do as well in follow-up courses.
Jenkins says this isn't always the case.
We've talked to adjunct instructors who taught in both 2- and 4-year institutions using the same books, and so they know there's comparability.
Community college students have some of the highest graduation rates once they transfer to 4-year schools. David Rowe, WNPR News.
You heard that? What do you think?
Well, I can tell you, we were just talking about that at open house. I have a chemistry faculty member who teaches UConn Burlington chemistry. Our students get 3 chapters ahead of UConn's. There is no lab test for UConn students. Our students have a UConn. I mean, same instructor, same book. Our course is more rigorous. We expect more from our students. I mean, they don't do a lab final for UConn Burlington students. We do for our students. And he tells me he's 3 chapters ahead of where UConn students are.
So we teach
So
this.
the rigorousness that she was talking about, obviously, she has no idea what she's talking about. And he's right, half of our faculty teach, a lot of our faculty teach at the 4-year schools. A lot of times the exact same book. That's what apparently happened with the TAP in computer science. They were using the same books, and how can you say that it's not the same?
Right, yep. Same book, yeah.
And I'm teaching at your college, too.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes no sense to me.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, it's a perception
Mhm. Right.
that because, whatever, they're cheaper, we're not as rigorous.
Mhm.
And yet Texas and California have solved that problem.
Yeah.
And you show that, what, 72% of all Texas students start at community college?
Yeah.
I thought it was really higher in California, I was surprised it's only 62%, but still.
It's a percentage that attend community college and then get degrees, but yeah,
They
it's.
figured it out,
Mhm. Yeah.
and your statistics are very telling.
Yeah, and that's the perception, that somehow the education at a community college just isn't comparable, and it's not as rigorous as the first 2 years at a four-year institution. And the reason we hear a lot or excuse for rejecting the credits is they say, well, students just won't do well. And that's what we heard here. They just won't do well. If we accept the credits and accept those classes, they'll fail the next class in the sequence. They just won't be prepared. And the data is actually the complete opposite. The data shows that making students retake similar classes actually hurts their chances of graduating. It's more money, more time, hurts their chances, and the more credits they can have accepted, the better they do. And so the students who go to UConn, who lose credits and end up in the lower division standing, they have a 66% graduation rate. The students who go over with 60 or more and start with junior standing, they have an 82% graduation rate. And the students in the guaranteed admission program, you have to go through liberal arts, get your associates and transfer, they have an 88% graduation rate. So it shows you that accepting classes doesn't hurt, but it's that perception that is out there. And I think part of it, too, is as a system, I think we need to also do better to really put this data out there publicly and do it more. I mean, California has a whole section on their community college website that talks about the success of their students and how much it saves the state and how well they do and what percentage graduate from the California state universities and the University of California system that go through the community college system. And they put all that data out there. So part of it, too, is the data needs to be out there because there is that perception. But if we can show that data and really talk more about the success of our students, then I think that can help. It can help to get more students in our system, get to keep them here longer, and then hopefully to get the credits to transfer more. Yeah?
Will TAP help the 20% loss in transfer credit?
I mean, the goal,
I mean, I know that's the goal, is it gonna be?
the goal, well, I wasn't,
Oh, that's the
We're
burning
spending,
question.
I'm sorry, we're spending a lot of time on it, so.
yeah.
Yeah.
But TAP isn't for UConn, TAP is for the.
Well, TAP is, right, TAP is just for the state universities. TAP is not in part of UConn, and at the end I'll sort of show some recommendations I have on a statewide level. I mean, the goal of TAP is that you can do the 2 years, get your 60 credits, and transfer. If it works as intended, that's what it's supposed to do. Now, I wasn't involved in TAP, wasn't involved in putting the pathways together, so I don't want to sort of talk about whether it'll work or whether it wouldn't. We had a forum last week with the counselors, advisors, and all that to talk about TAP and the concerns and what we think needs to happen. The only thing I will say is that we'll talk about a little bit with TAP is the key is you need the technology to work because they have the pathways, but you also need the technology to be able to do the advising and to plug in the credits as needed. You need to run the classes so students can graduate. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But for whether or not TAP would work, what needs to be fixed, that I think would be a separate forum, so I don't want to get into that here. I'll give, at the end, I do have based on research, what I think would be the best scenario for Connecticut that works in other states, like Washington State, Florida, Arizona, Maryland, that I think would work well. It doesn't mean TAP won't work. It's just, I'll give from research, the best, what I think would work best, and we can go from there, and I'll let the TAP people explain the pathways and what they think needs to be fixed, what doesn't, and all that. So let me show one more clip. This was Senator Chris Murphy. About a week later, he proposed federal legislation to deal with the issue.
College. The goal is to get students degrees that can help them pay their loan debt. Next week's is last tonight in Hartford with the latest. Max.
And you need there, Kerry Lee, at the federal level, the target is really these for-profit colleges, many of them online. But here at the state level, a big issue now is making sure that
four-year college campuses is the number of credits they'll accept from community colleges. A recent study concluded that UConn on its own rejects about a fifth of them.
It's a real problem when the average transfer from a state community college to the University of Connecticut is losing one semester worth of work because their credits are being rejected. That shouldn't happen. Connecticut should fix that.
State senators say they're working on that problem now with UConn, the Board of Regents, and community colleges. They say money spent on credits should have some value.
We're working on getting these pathways so that community college students will be guaranteed, if they select a pathway, 100% of those credits will transfer from their 2 years at the community college to their university.
U.S. Senator Chris Murphy also wants to see more accountability from all colleges, public, private, and for-profit, to ensure that federal dollars are well spent on students' behalf, something he's pushing in Congress.
A lot of our not-for-profit colleges are beautiful, pristine places. They can probably afford to put a little bit less money into mowing and manicuring the lawns and building beautiful new buildings and put more money into tuition abatement.
On the issue of some of those credits transferring, in the statement, UConn told us that the university is very public with which courses do and don't transfer properly from community colleges. The university says it's really up to community college advisors to tell their students which courses they should be taking. Live in Hartford, Max Reese, NBC.
But that's not even true.
Right.
Because there are courses that their nursing program will take, but a engineering program won't take. Same course from the same school and different schools at UConn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's see, where's the... So, yeah, and that was when they put out their press release, that was the defense, which is we clearly specify on our website what transfers and what doesn't, so you should be able to figure it out. The advisor should tell students what transfers and what doesn't. Now, from the presentations today from Dr. Bailey, one of the things, it's never good to, have the afternoon sessions. Always nice to have morning sessions, but I liked following him because I knew he would be talking about the cafeteria model and talking about advising and the problem with advising. And people who don't advise do say that, well, why can't you just figure it out? It's on the website, just go there and figure it out, not realizing how difficult it actually is. And when you do the advising and actually have to put it together for a student, it's very difficult. There are so many different requirements, and it's very confusing, which, he went through that, and we know that. One of the things I work closely with the math science department at Gateway, and they run a lot of the courses that organic chemistry, biochemistry, and some really great courses. So in my study, I put this up as an example because I wanted the study to show, I knew what their defense would be. I knew they would say that, we clearly specify and they should get better advising because that's usually where they try to, schools, that's the other thing they try to say, that, it's the advisor's fault or the student's fault, but it's really confusing. So in the study, I wanted to give an example for someone who, would read this and doesn't do advising to see how difficult it is. So this is the pre-pharmacy pathway, this from Gateway, from the community college system to UConn, and this is for pharmacy students. This was a year and a half ago on UConn's website. So it's pre-pharmacy courses, and this is essentially a guided pathway, and it's really good if you look at it. It's, you have biology, chemistry, you have a 2-year track, you have A&P 1, A&P 2, organic. It's a really great pathway, and the pharmacy department designed this really well. They talked with, I guess, some of the community college professors about this, and what's great about it is because pharmacy is selective admission, if they don't get in here, they can go to a lot of their other science majors and have junior standing and graduate on time. They can take all these classes and roll them into that major, which is great because it gives them an option that they really wanted this but didn't get in, so where else can you go? So that looks great, right? It's great. The students can do 2 years at a community college and transfer over. Now.
Of course, if you go back up there, go back up to the top where they're taking the first term.
Yeah.
Okay, notice what they're taking the first term, calculus 1.
Right.
They come into a community college needing introductory algebra,
Right.
intermediate algebra, college algebra,
Mhm.
pre-calculus, so they have 2 years of math
Yeah.
to take before they get there. So when you say they're
Right,
going to be in the community college college for 4 years, because they're gonna do 2 years of prerequisites before they can get to.
Mhm. Yeah, and when we look at the pathways, when you look at the science pathways, engineering, engineering pathways may be 60, 68 credits, but it's really, if you start at calculus and you start at that highest level, which most students don't, but they have to do it in 2 years, so this is how they show it. But yes, certainly, this would be the perfect student who comes in and starts at calculus, but most likely
And passes every term.
right, and passes every term. But most likely, they're probably at intermediate.
Right, this student is university ready.
Right.
Absolutely.
Upon
And
entry,
they're
yeah.
going to community college for
Maybe because,
economics.
yeah, and,
Well, because of the economics, and it works.
and they have a
Yeah.
long path ahead of them. We have a student
Yeah.
who is on our vet tech program who wants to be veterinary, and so he wants to say, because he's gonna be in school vet.
Yeah. So, but that's, when they put together those paths, it's sort of the best, and developmental isn't included in there. So there is also where they say for some of the pathways, you also need to work with and put developmental pathways
Yes,
through
but
as
we
well.
don't consider
Mhm.
intermediate algebra, college algebra, and pre-calculus as developmental,
Right,
right?
Yeah.
And that would be a year and a half
before there, right.
before there,
Yeah.
and that, they're not even considered developmental.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But the reason I put this in the study was, you remember the last one where it was 2 years, and you had all those science classes? Well, now, that was on UConn's website, fall of 2014. And so now, if you go to that same website, for the second year, it says this: consider UConn, the Connecticut State University System, or another bachelor degree college or university to fulfill the sophomore level requirements. Which means now they don't accept any of these. And because we don't have a state law and statewide transfer and articulation agreements, most of our agreements are really, emails or general agreements that aren't binding. You can just change your mind anytime. And we see that with our students where, for an agreement to work, it has to be updated every year. There has to be a group overseeing it and updating it. There are students who will go through a pathway that was created 5 years ago. They transfer to a particular school, and those courses aren't even offered anymore because that program has changed. Or maybe there's a new department chair that doesn't like the way it's taught at the community colleges, so they say, I'm just not taking it. And they can just do that. There isn't if you don't have a state law and don't have those statewide agreements, then you can just do this because there isn't a system you have to go through to change things. So I put that in there just to show, because I knew they would say that, well, why can't you just figure it out? But the website said we would take this 2-year track, which was great, but then they changed their mind, and now they don't. And so now the student who transfers over loses that whole second year. So they have to spend an extra year retaking, all these high-level science classes and lab classes. And what are the odds a student would actually be able to get all these classes to retake them again anyway, to get them in sequence or when they need to? It's very hard. And what that leads a lot of students to do is just say, you know what, especially if they're a low-income student, we know from looking at, they'll say, you know what, I can't afford an extra year. I'm just going to do liberal arts or something else. I know I wanted science, but I can't afford it. I need to graduate in 2 years. Where can I roll these credits and graduate the quickest? And that's what drives a lot of students out of STEM, because they lose credits, and if they're low income, they can't absorb that extra semester a year of classes.
And I wonder how consistent this page is with the course equivalency screen that you go to when you course equivalency at UConn. I'm pretty sure that 2610 says our microbiology.
Micro.
And our anatomy and physiology, I bet the transfer equivalency screen shows that it actually would transfer, but then when you get to the department chairman, it won't transfer?
It depends. A&P 1 and 2, like our biochemistry, we reached out to UConn and they will accept biochemistry. Organic, the department has agreed, but the way UConn does it is it goes into the admissions office and then they send it to the major. Whatever the major is, it gets sent to that area and they have to approve it. So for example, A&P 1 and 2, UConn does not accept from the whole community college system, but if you want to go for nursing at UConn, they will accept it. They're the only area that will accept A&P 1 and 2 for nursing. So if you want to be a nurse at UConn and you apply, it works.
And how do you know?
Because
I do general advising, so how much
because nursing has a specific articulation, although the UConn one has been under review for at least a year and a half now.
Yeah.
They had it's a very specific agreement signed signed off by everybody. What's more troubling with that screen
Oh, let me-
is that they're not taking 100-level soc and psychs.
Yeah,
I mean,
you have 100, it's here, but the problem is you've got to redo all that.
But it's also suggesting
right, 'cause they're-
Yeah. So so I put that in there to show how, how difficult it is. And then, so we have probably, I guess, 10 minutes or so. So I want to show you from the Student Clearinghouse Research Center, about a third of all college students will transfer. That's at some point. And nearly half of the students transfer more than once before completing a bachelor's degree. So we know that there's a tremendous amount of transfer activity. The other part that's concerning is in the last study, 87% of community college students transfer without a degree. It's up from 80% in their last study 2 years earlier. So even though college is costing more, more students are transferring early. And for our system, and a really important fact as well, 90% of the students who started at a community college, transferred and got a bachelor's degree, did not complete a degree or associate's degree or certificate at the community college they started at. So to put that into perspective, we receive no credit for the students that we're helping because the only graduation rate that we report is the first-time full-time graduation rate. In community colleges, the majority of students we serve are part-time and they're transfer students. And there's no mechanism to show that. This is a small fraction, the first-time full-time is a small fraction of who we actually serve. But yet that's the statistic we report. So people say, well, community colleges have low graduation rates, but that's a small fraction of our students. And the fact that 90% of them, they started a community college, they receive a bachelor's degree, but they never completed anything from the first institution they started at. So that means only 10% of the students are completing at the first institution, and that institution can show them as a success. Everybody else, they're considered technically a failure because they didn't graduate. So, some of the barriers, what are some of the outside barriers students face to completing a degree? Our students, what are some of the outside barriers that they face? Transportation, sure. What else? Money, yep, money's important.
from the student who were-
Health, yeah, health, finance. And then life in general can be a barrier, yeah. And then what are some of the state and institutional barriers that they face? What are the institutional barriers they face at schools? Financial aid. So for some of the are we doing enough to remove some of the institutional barriers? Do students have a clear path to a degree? We talked about the cafeteria model, what Dr. Bailey talks about. And are the classes scheduled that are convenient for working students to complete a degree on time? So tap in our transfer pathways when they're put together. If those are perfect and they're done exactly the way they're supposed to and students are in the pathways, it doesn't work if we don't run the classes. And it doesn't work if we don't run them at a time that's convenient for students. And that's why a lot of students end up leaving because they just can't get the classes they need at times that they need them. So I want to show you a really amazing statistic. This is from 2010 in the Board of Regents. It shows you the transfer activity, where students transfer to. Now, we can meet with students, but they can say they want to go to particular schools, but it's important to look at where students go. So here is the sending institution, and this is the receiving institution. So, the Connecticut community colleges, we sent in 2010 393 students to UConn in that year. And then in that same year, 1,500 students went to the Connecticut State Universities. And look at this stat, which is amazing. 2,200 students swirled around, went to another community college. So it just shows you the movement throughout the system. And if you look at that same year, we sent 393 to UConn that fall. UConn sent 567 to us, to the community college system. So more students actually transfer into our system from UConn than we send out. So it shows you that there's just a tremendous amount of activity. And this is a really important stat, because when we design transfer pathways, we have to understand the reality of the movement, and they're going to move all around. And the problem is, it has to be sort of, why it has to be statewide is because you have to be able to, they have to be able to move around without losing credits and be in a common curriculum as they move around. And without that, then they end up losing some credits. And then this, which I'll show you, in the fall of 2011, which is another amazing statistic, I think, about transferring, 1,121 students who had 40 or more credits. They completed 40 or more credits at a community college. They transferred to a CSU or Charter Oak without completing their degree. So these students spent a significant amount of time with us. They got 40 credits, but they didn't complete their degree. This was presented when they approved the reverse transfer, which, you know, reverse transfer can be helpful, but it's difficult to do. And it's one of those things that, sure, it's helpful to the student, but it would also be nice if, you know, we could get them through the first time and get them to complete. But I just want to show you. So this shows you, this is fall 2011, students with 40 or more credits where they transferred to. So you can see these are the institutions they transferred to, and this is where they left. So students who, you know, 24 credits, 24 of them went to Central from Gateway, 84 went to Southern from Gateway. You know, Naugatuck Valley, you have 54 students left with 40 or more credits and went to Western without completing a degree. So they were close, they had 40, but they left early. They weren't able to complete their degree.
I just had one question about
Yeah.
the credits earned. I imagine you're talking just about college level credits, or were you even able to control for, because some of these students start in developmental?
Yeah, this was the Board of Regents. It was for their academic student affairs when they were putting this policy through. So I don't know if it included developmental or not. They said it said 40 cumulative. I'm not sure if it did include, but it said 40 college credits that were, I guess, eligible to transfer, and then they transferred with 40 credits. But it shows they had they had credits, but they just weren't able to complete. And then this is a really interesting thing that I wanted to show. This is students who, total transfers in 2014, in the last few years, to a four-year institution without a degree. They left without completing at a community college. So this is transfers from two-year to four-year institutions that transferred early. And it's about 80% of students transfer early before completing their degree. And, you know, one of the points I want to make with this is, you know, we spend a lot of time when we talk about retention, worrying a lot about students who aren't prepared for college and how we can help them get up to college level and some of those things. But we're really ignoring our transfer students. I mean, we're ignoring students who are college ready, who are doing well, who are taking credits, but they're leaving early because, you know, most likely they're not getting the classes they need at times they need, or the courses they're taking aren't transferring, or there isn't a specific pathway so they know, okay, I can really finish at a community college and then transfer. So I think for some of our retention, one of the key points is we really need to, I mean, this is 7,300 students. If you look at each of your schools, how many students left and went to a four-year school? Now, they left early, and one of the things in the next slide that I want to show you is why students leave early. You know, if you figure students who leave early, they're not leaving because of financial reasons, because those students went to a four-year school, so they're paying a lot more. If they went to a state university, it's almost 3 times as much. If they went to a private school, it's, you know, could be 5 or 10 times as much. It's hard to say. But the National Center for Education Statistics, they surveyed students who left after about a year from a community college and went to a four-year school and said, why did you leave? And these were the responses. 83% said, I left to pursue a bachelor's degree. The second most responses were, I finished the classes that I needed, that I wanted to take. So they said, my goal was a bachelor's degree. I finished, the classes that I wanted to take. What was at the bottom of that list was financial or academic problems, because obviously they weren't having academic problems. They went to a four-year school. They weren't financially, doesn't mean they could afford it, but they did transfer and they were paying a lot more. So it's a situation where we're losing these students to four-year schools who are leaving our system and paying a lot more to get the same product somewhere else. And we need to really focus on figuring out why they're leaving, what courses we can run so that we can keep them here so that we can graduate them. We're putting so much into the beginning, as Dr. Bailey said, that we're not getting them through and to graduate, and we're losing our students who have the best chance of graduating, and they're leaving early. And this was, so the changes, and I'll just wrap it, Senator Bartolomeo, after the Associated Press article ran, she had said that it's a problem that needs to be addressed. She said what needs to happen is we have to get it working for the community college, the state universities, then we need to apply that principle to UConn. And then what I had proposed was, statewide agreements, because in the study I call for that. We need statewide transfer and articulation agreements that would include UConn, the state universities, and basically the way it works, if you look at Florida, you look at Washington State, Maryland, Arizona, the legislature passes a law, mandates seamless transfer to all public four-year institutions, and then everyone sits down and they have a certain amount of time to put together these pathways. And if they don't do it, because the legislature controls the money, then there's a penalty for not doing that. And that's really the only way, when you look at the studies and nationwide, what gets it to work, to cut through all the bureaucracy and to get the credits to transfer, is the legislature really has to pass a law to mandate that it happen. And if you look, the two things when they talk about that, there were some studies on these statewide things, and they looked at the Southern Region Board had said, the state should provide a guarantee that any and all of the 60 hours will transfer. And they said while legislatures typically detest legislative involvement, or while educators detest it, it plays an important role. They looked at New Jersey, Arizona, and Washington State and found, it plays an important role to get things done. But the last, I'll just show you when you can look at it later, but it's, one of the things I wanted to see, from looking at all the research, one of the best things that works best from looking at those states is they have a 34-credit gen ed core, and that fulfills all lower division freshman and sophomore gen ed requirements. And that way, that's uniform across the state, across the system. So you can go to any community college, any four-year school, and it's uniform. It can't be where, I'm not getting into TAP or I'll let the TAP people explain TAP. This is based on my research and looking at the states where it really works. This is what works. It's a 34-credit gen ed core. If you complete it, you're done. SUNY has it. A lot of states have it, and you're done with those freshman and sophomore gen eds. You have a 60-credit associate's degree, fully transfers, and when you transfer, you're done with your freshman and sophomore gen eds. You don't have to transfer and then take a lot of other gen eds. You have an incentive to complete, but you don't punish them for not completing, because a lot of students aren't able to complete. And I think we should give them incentives to try and finish, but if they can't, and a lot of times the reason they can't is because they can't get the classes they need, we shouldn't punish them and make it more of a course by course. It should be any credits you complete will transfer. So if they have to leave at 40 credits go and apply to their degree. And you have to have a committee together that does an annual report to the legislature. That's the only way you know it works, to really track the students, track the data, and have a committee that gives it to the legislature. That way you know Washington State does this, Florida, Maryland, and then you know what works and you can fix it.